Maren Cole had barely finished saying, "Please, let me stay. I'll take care of your cattle," when Ben Calder turned toward the stock pens. Victor Shaw's scale beam dropped. A clerk called out the weight, and Maren said, "Don't sign that ticket." Ben looked back at her. The yard quieted except for cattle pushing against the rails. Maren stood beside the gate with dust on her skirt and a bedroll over one shoulder. She was 24, sun-browned, thin from travel, with dark hair braided beneath a faded hat. Ben had been about to refuse her. He and his sister Leah were behind on feed bills. The 76 cattle in the pens were supposed to fix that problem today. Instead, this stranger was telling him not to sell them. Victor Shaw stepped away from the portable livestock scale. "Something wrong?" he asked. Maren watched another group enter the pen. "That scale is light." Shaw smiled. Ben did not. "You've been here 3 minutes," Ben said. "I watched 12 steers cross it. That tells you their weight?" "It tells me they aren't as light as his ticket says." Shaw flattened the paper against his vest. "You looking for work, miss?" "Yes." "Then learn when not to interfere with business." Maren looked only at Ben. "Do you have unopened salt sacks?" Leah stood by the barn with an account book under one arm. "2," she said. "50 pounds each?" Leah nodded. "Put them on the scale." Shaw's smile thinned. "We are weighing cattle." "If the scale is right," Maren said, "I'll apologize and leave." Ben studied her, then nodded to Leah. The 2 canvas sacks arrived, still stitched shut. 50 pounds printed across each one. Ben placed both on the empty platform. The beam moved. It stopped below 100 pounds. Leah lowered her pencil. Ben looked at Shaw. Shaw tapped the metal housing. Portable scales shift. Dirt gets under them. "Enough to lose 12 pounds on 100? Maren asked. Ben picked up the cattle ticket. Every missing pound meant money leaving Dry Basin Ranch. "How long has it been weighing light?" he asked. Shaw straightened. "You are accusing me over salt sacks?" "She is," Ben said. "I'm asking." Shaw looked harder at Maren. Then recognition came. Maren Cole. Her posture changed by almost nothing, but Ben saw it. "Worked for Talbot outside Burns," Shaw said. "He fired her, said she questioned every figure and caused trouble wherever she went." Ben turned to her. "Were you fired?" "Yes." Shaw spread his hands. "There you are." Maren touched a short red cord looped at her belt. 10 knots ran along it. "Why?" Ben asked. She looked at him. "That answer can wait. The scale cannot." Shaw laughed. "She asks you for food and a bed, then calls your buyer crooked. You want to risk your ranch on that?" Ben looked through the rails. The cattle were good animals. He had raised most of them from calves. Then he looked at the salt sacks. The sale ticket was still unsigned. He tore it in half. "No sale today." Leah's face tightened. "Ben," he knew. They needed the money. Shaw knew too. "You have a bank payment coming," Shaw said. "When you crawl back, my offer will be lower." Ben dropped the torn ticket into the dust. "Then I'd better not crawl back." Shaw motioned to his crew. Before leaving, he looked at Maren. "Talbot warned people about you for a reason." Maren said nothing. Dust followed Shaw's wagon down the road. Ben turned to her. "You cost me a sale. I stopped you signing a bad one. That remains to be seen." "Yes." Leah came closer. "We still can't afford another hand." Maren reached for her bedroll. "I understand." Ben watched the cattle crowd near the trough. Then he asked, "How long to sort that herd properly?" "For market?" "Yes. Tomorrow afternoon." "Tomorrow morning." "You'll get bad groups." "I need speed." "You need an accurate count more." Ben stared at her. Leah almost smiled. Ben pointed toward the bunkroom attached to the feed shed. 30 days. Meals, a bed, wages after the herd sells. Maren stayed still. "You're hiring me? I'm giving you 30 days to prove I haven't made 2 bad decisions in one morning." She lifted her bedroll. "That room lock?" "From inside." Then we have an agreement. By sunset, Ben understood why another employer might have called her difficult. Maren stopped the sorting twice, because the counts failed to match. She refused to mix weaker steers with heavier ones, merely to fill a pen. Each time 10 cattle passed, she moved a knot on the red cord. Ben tried to hurry her. She ignored him. At the third pen, he stepped beside her. We're losing daylight. We lose the count. We lose money. You always answer the boss like this. Only when he's wrong. A steer slipped between two groups. Ben glanced toward the pens. He had lost track. Maren touched the 7th knot. 71. 5 behind the shed. 5 heads appeared around the corner. Ben stepped aside. Keep going. After supper, Leah spread the accounts across the kitchen table. Maren stayed near the doorway until Leah waved her closer. Stopping Shaw's sale bought us honesty, Leah said. It did not buy time. She drew a line beneath a column of figures. Ben leaned over the book. How much? 11 days. Maren looked toward the wall calendar. If the bank installment isn't covered by then, Leah said, we lose the extension. Ben rubbed one hand across his face. What about Painted Gorge? Independent buyers, Leah said. Certified railroad scale. Distance? Too far to waste a day. Maren studied the small wall map. Ben took the torn half of Shaw's ticket from his coat and laid it on the table. We're not selling to him. Leah looked at Maren. Ben did too. We take the herd to Painted Gorge. Maren looked again at the calendar. 11 days. She slid the red cord once through her fingers. Then tomorrow, she said, we find out whether your herd can make the distance before your money runs out. Before sunrise, Maren was already in the west pen, with the red counting cord looped around her fingers. Ben came through the gate carrying a lantern. You sleep at all? Enough. He looked at the cattle. You said yesterday afternoon. I said I could sort them by then. I didn't say they'd all be worth taking. Ben stopped. Maren pointed toward a smaller group near the far rail. 8 steers stood apart from the others. They were not sick, but their hips showed more sharply than the rest. They'll slow the herd, she said. They still weigh something. So does a wagon with a broken wheel. Ben frowned. We need every dollar. And if these 8 make us lose half a day, they could cost you more than they bring. Ben walked toward the weaker animals. Maren followed. He ran one hand over a steer's back, then looked toward the larger group. 68 head. Yes, that is a hard number to accept. It is easier than arriving too late with 76. Ben gave her a long look. You always make bad news sound simple? No, I just don't make it prettier. By breakfast, Leah had adjusted the figures. She wrote 68 in pencil. Minimum sale price goes up, she said. Ben stared at the page. Maren stood across from him. If we reach Painted Gorge in good condition, buyers will pay for weight, not head count. Yes. Ben pushed back from the table. Leave the 8. Leah looked up. That's your decision? Ben glanced at Maren. No, it's hers. Maren shook her head. It becomes yours once you act on it. Ben held her eyes for a moment. Then he nodded. Fine, my decision. They moved the market herd by mid-morning. For 2 days, Dry Basin Ranch became a place of preparation rather than routine. Maren checked hooves, water habits, and which cattle pushed too hard when crowded. Ben repaired 2 gate hinges and found canvas for feed sacks. Leah measured what they could carry without loading the horses too heavily. Every choice reduced something. Food, time, weight, money. On the 3rd morning, they drove the 68 cattle toward the local depot. The trip was supposed to be simple. 3 hours to the rail pens. Load before noon. Ride with the shipment to Painted Gorge. Sell there. Return with enough money to satisfy the bank. Ben rode ahead while Maren worked the rear. She kept the herd moving at a steady walk. Whenever the cattle stretched too far apart, She angled them back together before they could scatter. At the depot, the first thing Ben noticed was silence. No stockmen shouted. No cattle cars stood open. A locomotive hissed beside the water tower, but the livestock siding was packed with closed rail cars marked for Shaw Livestock Company. Ben dismounted. The station agent came from his office pulling on his coat. Calder. "Morning, Ellis. We're here for cars." Ellis looked toward the herd, then toward the siding. "I was afraid of that." Ben's face hardened. "Afraid of what?" "Shaw booked every cattle car I've got through Friday." Maren rode closer. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon." Ben looked at her. The accusation came before he stopped it. "You knew he might do this?" Maren's expression went still. "I knew he controlled buyers. I didn't know he controlled this depot. You pushed me to cancel the sale. I showed you a false scale. And now I have 68 cattle standing beside a railroad they can't use." Ellis stepped backward toward his office. "I'll leave you two to it." Maren got down from her horse. "You want to blame me? Do it properly." Ben said nothing. She unfastened the bedroll behind her saddle. His eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "What people do when they're told their word was expensive. I didn't tell you to leave. You didn't have to." Ben looked toward the cattle, then back at her. "Why did Talbot fire you?" Maren's hands stopped on the strap. For several seconds, only the locomotive could be heard. Finally, she said, "He bought cattle for a packing house." Ben waited. "I kept his weight books." "Go on." "One afternoon he handed me a total that didn't match what I had written from the scale. He told me to copy his number into the final sheet." "And you refused?" "Yes." "What happened?" "He said I had counted wrong." "Had you?" "No." Ben looked toward the rail cars bearing Shaw's name. Maren continued. "Next morning my job was gone. By the end of the week, 3 ranches I'd worked before wouldn't hire me. Talbot talked. He signed the checks. People listened." Ben stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" Maren gave a short pull on the bedroll strap. "Because you'd known me one morning. And I hired you after Shaw warned me about you." That stopped her. Ben pointed toward the closed cattle cars. "I'm angry because I'm running out of choices. That doesn't mean I think he was right about you." Maren looked at him for the first time since the argument began. "Then don't make me defend myself every time something goes wrong." Ben nodded once. "Fair." Leah arrived in the supply wagon an hour later. She listened to Ellis explain the booking problem, then opened her account book on the wagon seat. "Friday is too late," she said. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. "How late?" "The bank payment is due Monday morning." Maren looked west. A line of dark basalt ridges cut across the distance. "There's another way." Ben followed her gaze. "What way?" "Old stock trail." Ellis leaned from the office doorway. "Through Juniper Wash?" Maren nodded. He made a doubtful sound. "That hasn't been used much since the railroad came." "It still reaches Painted Gorge?" Ben asked. "How far?" "Longer than the train." "That isn't an answer. 2 hard days if the herd holds together. Longer if it doesn't." Leah counted dates silently. "Today is Thursday." Maren nodded. "Last eastbound cattle shipment leaves Painted Gorge Monday evening." Ben looked at her. "You're sure?" "I worked that junction 2 seasons ago." Leah closed the book. "If you miss that train, we miss the payment." Ben walked to the edge of the platform. For several seconds, he watched Shaw's empty cattle cars sitting on the siding. Then he turned. "We take the trail." Ellis looked surprised. "With 68 head?" "With 68. Maren tied her bedroll back behind the saddle. Ben noticed. "You staying?" "For now." That sounded encouraging. It wasn't meant to. By late afternoon, the herd was moving west instead of boarding a train. The depot shrank behind them. Cinders drifted across the track. Ahead waited open range, dry water country, and 2 days of ground Ben had not planned to cross. Maren rode beside him. Neither spoke until the depot clock carried faintly across the evening air. 6 slow strikes. Ben looked back once. Maren did not. 4 days, she said. Then she turned her horse toward the old stock trail, and the herd followed. The old stock trail narrowed before noon. Dry grass gave way to black basalt shelves that rose from the earth like broken walls. The cattle moved more carefully there, picking their way between stone and thorn brush, while dust hung low around their legs. Ben rode point. Maren stayed behind the herd, watching how the animals carried themselves. By early afternoon, she called for a stop. Ben turned in the saddle. "We're losing time. We'll lose more if we push them into the next stretch thirsty. There should be water ahead." There should be. He heard the difference. Maren rode past him toward a fork where the trail split around a low ridge. The eastern path was wider and shorter. Ben pointed toward it. "That cuts at least 3 miles. Maren dismounted. She crouched beside the trail. Old manure lay scattered across the hard ground. Some was days old. Some looked fresher. She walked farther, examining hoof marks pressed into the dust. Ben waited. "What are you seeing?" "Too many cattle." So whoever came through here before us used the same shortcut." She stood. "There's a runoff pool beyond that ridge. If 3 herds have already watered there, it may be mud by now." Ben looked toward the western trail. "That route adds hours." "Yes, and you're guessing." "I'm reading what's here. We have a train deadline. We also have 68 animals that won't reach it without water." Ben looked at the herd. The cattle were still settled. For now. He hated choices where both answers cost something. Maren waited without pressing him. Finally, Ben turned his horse west. "We take the long way." Maren mounted. "Good. That is all I get?" "You want applause?" He gave her a tired look. She almost smiled. The western bend dropped into a shallow basin before sunset. Water still stood beneath cottonwoods. Not much. Enough. Ben climbed down and removed his hat. "I suppose this is where you remind me you were right." Maren loosened her horse's cinch. "No need. That almost sounds humble. I'm saving my strength." They watered the herd in groups to keep the banks from breaking down. By the time the last cattle drank, the sun had fallen behind the ridge. They had lost nearly half a day, but they still had every animal. The next morning, the trail became worse. A narrow basalt shelf forced the herd into a long single file. The drop beside it was not high enough to kill a steer, but it was steep enough to scatter the group and cost hours they did not have. Maren rode ahead. 10 at a time, she said. Ben looked at the narrow passage. "We can move 15. 10. We need speed. We need control." Ben muttered something under his breath. Maren heard it. "You can complain after the 10th group." She pulled the red cord from her belt. 1 knot passed beneath her thumb as the first 10 cattle crossed. Ben took position at the far end. Another 10 followed. Then another. By the 5th group, Ben stopped asking whether she had counted correctly. By the 6th, he was watching the cord. A steer hesitated halfway across. The animals behind it crowded forward. Ben raised one arm. "Hold them." Maren moved her horse sideways, creating space rather than pressure. The steer finally stepped forward. The rest followed. When the final group cleared the shelf, Ben looked at her cord. 8 short. Behind the bend. He turned. 8 cattle appeared. Ben shook his head. "You enjoy that." "What?" "Being right before I am. I enjoy keeping your cattle together." He rode closer. "Same thing lately." That evening, they camped beside a dry wash. Ben repaired a loose gate panel they had carried for temporary pens. Maren held the frame steady while he tightened the wire. For the first time all day, neither was rushing. Ben said, "When this is done, what were you planning to do?" "Find another ranch. After Dry Basin, my 30 days would be nearly finished." Ben stopped working. "You still think I'm counting days?" "That was the agreement. I don't want a 30-day hand." Maren looked at him. Ben went back to the wire. I want someone who tells me when the water is gone, before I ride 20 cattle into an empty hole. That sounds less flattering when you say it that way. I'm not finished. She waited. I want someone who argues with me before I make an expensive mistake. Maren folded her arms. That position may require higher wages. Ben looked up. There she is. A horse approached through the dusk before she could answer. Both turned. The rider was alone, traveling east. He slowed when he saw their camp. You Calder? Ben stood. Yes. The rider nodded toward Maren. And that Cole woman with you. Maren's face changed. Ben stepped forward. Why? Past Painted Gorge this morning. Shaw's there. Ben's hands went still. The rider continued. He's telling buyers Calder cattle may already belong to him. Says there's an unfinished purchase agreement. There is no signed agreement, Ben said. Also says she falsifies weights. The rider nodded toward Maren. Thought you'd want to know. Ben looked at her. Maren's attention remained on the fire. The rider moved on. For a few seconds, Ben said nothing. Then Maren began rolling her bedroll. What are you doing? Thinking ahead. No. She stopped. No what? No leaving. You heard him. I did. If Shaw convinces the buyers I'm trouble, you can still distance yourself. Ben stepped between her and the saddle. You work for Dry Basin. For 4 weeks. You speak with my authority. Maren looked at him carefully. You understand what that may cost? I'm learning. She slowly set the bedroll down again. Morning came cold and clear. By noon they reached the ridge above Painted Gorge. Rail smoke rose beyond the stock pens. The herd smelled water and began pressing forward. Ben looked at the lowering sun. We can make it if we push. Maren studied the cattle. No. He stared at her. We are almost out of time. They're hot and bunched. Rush them downhill and they'll reach the scale blowing hard and fighting the pens. The train won't wait. Neither will a buyer if your cattle look half-run to death. Ben looked toward Painted Gorge, then at Maren. One last time, he turned his horse sideways and slowed the herd. They reached the junction with the sun touching the western ridge. The first Calder steer stepped into the holding pen. The station master checked his pocket watch. Beside the certified scale stood Victor Shaw. His coat was clean. His smile was already waiting. He looked at Maren, then turned to the weighmaster. Before you touch that beam, Shaw said, you ought to hear who she really is. Victor Shaw rested one hand on the rail beside the certified scale. The weighmaster, a square-built man named Amos Reed, kept his pencil above the blank ticket. Maren said nothing. Shaw looked pleased by that. Miss Cole worked for Talbot Livestock, he said. She was dismissed for interfering with weight records. Now she has convinced Calder to drag a tired herd across half the county because she claims everyone else is dishonest. Ben stepped beside Maren. My cattle are here to be weighed. Shaw reached inside his coat and produced a folded paper. These cattle were already offered to me. He handed the paper to Reed. Ben recognized the ticket immediately. The same numbers. The same false weights. No signature. Reed looked at the bottom. You didn't sign this, Calder. No. Shaw's face tightened. We had an understanding. Ben pointed toward the empty signature line. You had an offer. Maren finally spoke. Is this scale certified? Reed looked at her. Inspected last month. Available to any rancher who pays the fee. Yes. Then weigh the cattle. Shaw stepped closer. You think a scale clears your name? Maren looked at him. No. She pointed toward the first group waiting behind the gate. It tells us what the cattle weigh. That is all I need from it. The Ben almost smiled. Reed folded Shaw's paper and handed it back. Bring 10 through. Maren pulled the red counting cord from her belt. Ben opened the gate. The first group entered the platform. The beam moved. Reed adjusted the sliding weight. Metal clicked against metal. Then the beam settled level. He called the number. Leah's figures had given them a rough expectation before the drive. The certified weight was higher than Shaw's old total, not slightly. Enough to matter. Shaw said, different day, different feed, different conditions. Maren moved 1 knot beneath her thumb. Next 10. Ben worked the opposite gate. The second group entered. Another weight, again higher than Shaw's figures. The third group came through. Then the fourth. By then, 2 ranchers waiting near the loading pens had stopped talking and begun listening. One of them pulled an old folded ticket from his pocket. Shaw noticed. "You men have business of your own." The rancher did not move. Reed called another number. Ben repeated it aloud while Maren checked the count. Every group landed close to what Maren had predicted from condition and build. None matched Shaw's low totals. When the last 8 cattle crossed, Reed added the columns. Ben stood at the rail with dust-dried white across his coat. Maren watched Reed's pencil. Shaw watched Ben. The final total came. Ben did not speak for a moment. Leah's minimum figure had been correct. At the current Painted Gorge price, the herd would cover the bank installment, the rail charges, and enough feed to carry Dry Basin into winter. Reed turned the ticket around. "Sign if you want them offered." Ben took the pencil. Shaw said, "If you do this, Calder, don't expect my buyers to work with you again." Ben looked over. "You already taught me what that is worth." He signed. An independent buyer named Franklin Moore stepped forward from the far pen. "I'll take the lot at today's posted price." Shaw laughed once. "You have not inspected every animal." "I've watched them cross this scale for the last hour." Moore looked at Ben. "They arrived in better condition than most cattle I've seen come off shorter drives." His eyes shifted toward Maren. "Who paced them?" "She did," Ben said. Maren touched the next knot out of habit, then stopped. There were no cattle left to count. Moore offered his hand. Ben shook it. The sale was made. There was no cheering. There was work. The eastbound train was already being assembled. Ben and Maren moved the herd toward the loading chutes, while Reed completed the paperwork. Shaw remained beside the scale. One of the ranchers who had been watching approached Reed with his own old weight ticket. "Can I test something tomorrow?" Reed nodded. Another rancher joined him. Shaw walked away before the second man finished speaking. Maren watched him cross the yard. Ben came beside her. "You expected that?" "No." "What did you expect?" "That if we got fair weight, we could pay your bank. That was all?" It was enough. They returned to the cattle. For the next 40 minutes, romance had no place in the pens. A steer backed away from the ramp. Ben reset the gate. Maren changed the angle of the next group. They loaded steadily rather than fast. When the final car door slid shut, the station master raised his watch. 3 minutes remained. The locomotive released a long burst of steam. Ben leaned both hands against the rail. "We made it." Maren looked at him. "You nearly ruined it twice." "Only twice?" "3 times if we count the Eastern Water Trail." He laughed. She did too. It was the first time he had heard the sound without strain beneath it. 2 days later, Ben walked into the bank with the sale receipt. The installment was paid. When he returned to Dry Basin, Maren was repairing a sorting gate. Her 30-day agreement had 6 days left. Ben stood beside the post until she noticed him. "Bank?" "Paid." "Good." He held out a folded sheet. She did not take it. "What is that?" "Work." "I already have work." "Permanent work." She looked at him more carefully. Ben unfolded the page. "Cattle manager, monthly wage. Authority over sorting, condition, market preparation, and route decisions." Maren read it. "You wrote authority?" "Leah made me. She is sensible. She also said I should stop pretending I only need another hired hand." Maren raised her eyes. Ben continued. "I'm not offering this because you saved Dry Basin. No? I'm offering it because tomorrow you'll probably tell me I'm wrong again. That seems likely." He held out the pencil. Maren signed. Months later, spring grass returned around Dry Basin. Beside the sorting pens stood a new certified livestock scale built on a timber platform. Ben adjusted the empty beam. Maren watched until it rested exactly at 0. Then she removed the red 10-knot cord from her belt and hung it from the new gate. Ben reached for her hand. Maren looked down at their joined fingers, then left her hand where it was. Together, they opened the gate. The first spring cattle walked onto the scale. If you enjoyed riding this trail with Maren and Ben, subscribe and leave a like for the next Wild West story.